Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We start our lesson by reciting Surah Al-Fatihah. Okay, for this session, we are going to cover with regard to the tax reliefs and also rebates. Okay, so in order for our purpose of study, we only would be using year of assessment 2019 rulings, right? Because every year tax ruling are changing depending on the needs of the society, fiscal policy, and also tax ruling and so on, right? Because every time when they do the rulings, there are some purpose for it. So for the purpose of yourself, you would actually will be using rulings that related to YA 2019 only. Therefore, for the purpose of exam, you would be using or referring to year of assessment 2019. So today we are going to cover tax reliefs, tax rebates, and also tax liability, because at the end of the day, after you have computed your chargeable income, therefore you should know how to compute a tax liability. Okay, I already shown to you this particular slide earlier on, but today we will come back to this. Okay, however, today I'm going to talk about joint and also separate assessment. Okay, before we look at what is joint assessment, what is separate assessment, whenever you do your tax computation, okay, especially when you have husband and wife, in order to do computation, you would do separately for husband and also for wife. Therefore, with regard to the husband, you would actually calculate how much will be their employment income, and what are the expenses that can be deducted, and therefore what is their adjusted and statutory employment income for the husband, and followed by, if let's say the husband have any other sources of income such as dividend, interest, okay, if let's say they have rental, royalty, and so on, therefore you would compute for himself alone, okay, separately. So therefore, that's why you can see here you have two columns, one for husband and one for wife, because whatever income for husband will be computed for his own, and therefore for the wife also will be computed on her own. Okay, so once you get all your adjusted or statutory employment income, dividend income, rental income, and so on, therefore you will come to the stage of aggregate income. Okay, remember your GASAT. Alright, your gross, adjusted, and statutory income. Therefore, now the next one will be aggregate income. Alright, so what does it mean by aggregate income? Aggregate income means you add on all your statutory income. Okay, it's an accumulation of all your statutory income. So when you add on everything, therefore you will get aggregate income. And under the format of tax computation, after aggregate income, you would actually allow to minus any current year business loss. This one I will explain further when we come to business income topic. And then later on, you can also minus approved donation. Alright, so for individual, there are some donations that you can deduct, okay, for the purpose to further reduce your income taxable. Alright, chargeable income, because the idea is that the more that you can deduct, therefore the lesser your income will be, and of course your tax liability also will be lesser. Alright, however, it's not all donations that you do can get deductions. It's only approved donations under section 44. Okay, and in the case of individual, it is actually restricted to 7% of your aggregate income. Therefore, if let's say you want to maximize your claim, then you have to plan. Alright, but if you are generous, it doesn't matter. Okay, so aggregate income minus these two at this moment will derive to your total income. So at this point, husband would have his own total income, wife would have her own total income. Okay, what will happen when we go for joint assessment or separate assessment? Alright, so normally people will go for separate assessment when husband is working, wife is working. Alright. Therefore, they will go for separate assessment. That means your income will be assessed on separate basis. So, meaning the husband would have his own tax liability on his own income, and wife also would have her own tax liability on her own income. Okay. However, people might have an option to go for joint assessment. Okay. What does it mean by joint assessment? Joint assessment is when both of the income will be assessed as one, and therefore for husband and wife you only have one tax liability. Okay, so later I will show to you how is the format looks like. Alright, when would you go for joint assessment? Okay, you will go for joint assessment in the case where husband is working and wife is not working. Right, husband is working and wife is not working, or wife is working and husband is not working. You have husband. Alright. Okay, so in this case, because now it's quite common, especially in post-COVID, you will see some of the husband is being retrenched, therefore only wife is working. So in that matter, you would actually because before this, let's say both are working, therefore you go for separate assessment, right? But under these circumstances where husband is not working, only wife is working, therefore, you can go for joint assessment. So the option to go for joint or separate assessment can be changed every year, right? Can be changed every year. So maybe this year you will go for separate assessment. Next year you will go for joint assessment. So if people know how to do tax planning, they would actually predict how much is their tax liability. Then they can decide whether to go for joint assessment or separate assessment. Okay. Alright, this is actually how the joint assessment computation looks like. So what happens is that when you have joint assessment, okay, you would have your total income. So as I mentioned earlier on, so you will do separately, right, for husband and wife until total income. So if you opt for joint assessment, what is the impact? Your total income will be added and become as one. Okay, your total income will be added and become as one. And what we are going to cover today is that how the personal relief can be claimed under joint assessment. Okay, how the personal relief can be claimed under joint assessment. Okay, so that is with regard to a personal relief. Right, so later on what will happen is that you have one total income for both minus personal relief, whatever that you're entitled to claim under joint assessment. Okay, because there are some differences later on when you want to claim your relief, and therefore you derive to your chargeable income. So if you see here, you only have one chargeable income. So based on that chargeable income, you would actually compute your total income tax. Okay, and later you can further reduce your total income tax based on certain rebates that are given to you. Okay, and for Muslim taxpayer, you can further reduce your chargeable income based on the zakat payment that you have made, and then also later on, whatever your tax liability will be compared against total monthly total tax deduction that you have made every year. Every single month. Okay, because normally what happens is that from January, you already do your tax deduction from your salary. Okay, so if let's say every month you receive your gross salary 5,000, therefore you would have normally deductions of EPF, deductions of tax. Okay, this is all statutory deductions which is required for every employee in the case of Malaysia. Okay, so therefore at the end of the whole year 2019, you already know how much is your total tax deduction that you have remitted to income tax office. Therefore, it's not a burden for the taxpayer to pay the whole lump sum at the end of the year. Okay, because you already pay like installment on monthly basis, depending on your salary, depending also on the dependents that you have. Okay, because normally there is a table already provided by the income tax. So from the table you would actually can see if you're single, okay, how based on certain salary, how much is your monthly tax deduction. But if let's say if you're married, okay, if you're married, then how many children will you have. So depending on that table and also based on your salary, so what will be the monthly deductions that you have. Okay, so it's already guided by the so finance people in your company would actually know based on that table how much will be your monthly deductions. And normally in the case of Muslim taxpayer, you can actually reduce your monthly tax deduction by having your zakat deduction every month. Okay, so again that is part of the tax planning. All right, so here after you get your tax liability, you minus your monthly tax deduction. There are possibility that you still have to pay your tax, therefore you would have balance of tax payable. And there are also a possibility that your total monthly tax deduction exceed your total tax payable. Therefore, that means you have excess of your money in the income tax. Okay, so let's say your tax liability is 1,000. Your total monthly tax deductions amounting to 20,000. So you still have an excess. Okay, your money inside the LHDN or income tax office. Therefore, you can get refund. So in the case of Malaysia, nowadays because of the e-filing, if your record is have no hanky-panky or being audited or is there is any outstanding whatsoever, normally within 2 weeks from your submission, you would actually receive your tax refund immediately remitted into your account. Okay, so it's quite efficient in the case of Malaysia. Alright, so that's what happened in the case of joint assessment. Okay, in the case of separate assessment, how does it looks like? Okay, so you see there, husband and wife is computed based on separate basis. Okay, starting from the beginning until total income. So that also would happen to the end. Okay, so now the husband would have his own total income, and then he would actually claim whatever relief that he can from based on his own what's this entitlement. Therefore he would have his own chargeable income. So based on his own chargeable income, he will compute his tax liability minus any rebates if he can claim, okay, and minus his own zakat payment. Therefore he will get his own tax liability and set off against his own total monthly tax deduction for the year, and therefore he would know whether he would have tax liability or tax refund. Alright, the same thing with the wife. Okay, you would have your own computation of income up until your own total income. Again, you minus whatever relief that you can claim, and therefore you will have your own chargeable income. So again, based on that, you compute your own tax liability. And then what will be the rebates that you can claim, if any, depends on your eligibility, and minus any zakat payment. Therefore you will have your tax liability compares against your monthly tax deduction. Okay, so monthly tax deduction, and therefore you again would know whether you will have tax liability or tax refund. Alright, so how do you know, how do you want to maximize? Okay, if let's say to get as much of tax refund in the case of tax planning. Okay, so if you go back to your project, you can see actually your project is actually referred to this part. Okay, we want to see the objective of the project is actually, if you understand the whole thing, alright, the whole project is actually to see whether the taxpayer in Malaysia is actually doing tax planning or not. Alright, okay, and also we want to know whether their tax planning, what is the objective? Is it to minimize their tax liability, or is it to maximize their tax relief, or is it to maximize their tax refund? Right, because and then when we want to claim tax refund, is it you want to get the whole tax refund or what, and so on. Okay, so that is actually the format for separate assessment.